Welcome to SALT, the SALT Casts. My name is Bob Turner, and I serve as the director of the Sunset Academy of Leadership Training, or SALT. And as we have talked about before, the design of these SALT Casts is to provide information that is beneficial, to be a resource to leaders and congregations to help strengthen current leaders, and at the same time to provide some direction for the development of future leaders. Today, we're very privileged to have with us Brandi Kendall, who works at the Sunset International Bible Institute and serves in a way as an instructor here, not only in the program, but also serves as an instructor in the master's program in teaching about conflict resolution. And that's going to be the subject of our SALTcast today, conflict resolution. So welcome, Brandi.
Good to be here.
And appreciate you taking time to be with us. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in regards to conflict resolution?
Well, especially when it comes to church, it goes back to, I've been in ministry now about 36 years, served both in domestic church, church planning, church growing, as both a minister, as a youth minister, went on to work on 4 continents across the world in missionary work as church planter, again as equipper, working with leaderships from a multitude of cultures and circumstances that have brought me to this place so far. So when it comes to conflict and the need for resolution, it's been a multicultural kind of experience.
Sure.
The one real truth that's amazing is that this isn't a stateside problem. This is not a problem that only exists here in the Americas, but this is a universal problem.
Yes.
Whenever you bring 2 people together, particularly when you're seeking a common goal, and in spite of the common goal, personality means there will be conflict. Sure. At some point along the way. So ministry of any kind has within it creating a need for a discussion like this.
Yes.
It's an absolute.
It's inevitable. I mean, especially for people who are in leadership, they're going to have to deal with conflict among themselves and oftentimes in congregation. If you would, take a few moments and define the idea of conflict, if you will, and maybe talk a little bit about both the positive and the negative effects of conflict when it comes to leadership.
Sure. Conflict by nature is based on relationship. Mm-hmm. You can't talk about conflict without understanding that conflict only exists within the realm of relationship. People getting along, working together, going in a direction together, serving together. Conflict comes when any kind of an obstacle comes in between that relationship.
Okay.
That's as basic a definition as you can get of conflict. When a relationship, and the two major aspects of a relationship are distance and damage.
Okay.
The conflict or the nature of the conflict, depending on the distance that is created between 2 people or groups of people, and the damage that's done in that distance. That's how you measure conflict.
Okay.
Because those are the 2 things that happen first. When conflict or when that obstacle gets in the way, there's an immediate distance created. And depending on how far that distance is or how long that distance is created, damage is done. Conflict resolution comes into play in dealing with, okay, how do we get back to the kind of relationship that's healthy? You might say there are a number of basic levels of that. For instance, we might start fundamentally with a predicament, a question. Questions asked, and you have an opinion, I have an opinion. We have a predicament now. Mm-hmm. It's not a problem, but you and I are both sitting here trying to decide, okay, I know I don't see it that way. I'm not sure I see it your way. what do I want to do with that? By nature, it doesn't necessarily separate us. It doesn't create a great distance. So the damage done is not too big, other than, I'm not sure I like your opinion.
Okay.
Now, how long I stay there, how long I keep myself at that place, or if I'm willing to pull myself back farther,
right?
Conflict grows. So we could move from a basic predicament onto, well, what do we want to call it? How about just disagreement? Where now I have a predicament. I don't know what to do with this idea that, okay, I recognize my opinion and yours are different. Now I'm going to go to a step and say, okay, I'm going to disagree with you. Now, what happens when I come out and say, okay, I disagree?
Conflict.
Now we have an obstacle.
Right.
Now we have something in our way that's going to affect the distance and the damage that could be done depending on how I respond. So I'm now responsible for my predicament. So it grows. And it can go from there to not only disagreement, but it might become, how about a contest? Where, okay, now, not only do we disagree, but I'm right.
Mm. And that makes me wrong.
Okay, so what has happened now to your side of this relationship?
Right.
So, and then again, we keep moving on, and we move from that idea of contest to we have to choose a response. Generally, flight or fight.
Mm.
So we either ignore the problem and deal with it some other way, or we have to try to solve the problem, and we're just going to call that fight. Now, that could be good, or it could be bad.
Right.
Depending on the battle. Right? Now, we could go one step further and say it's the irreconcilable problem.
Right.
And that's when we can't find a repair. We can't find a way to get back to a relationship that's healthy. So again, there's so many different levels of conflict that the need for being aware and the need for a plan to deal with conflict in general is becoming a greater and greater problem, because every one of those levels exists in every community of faith, every family, every leadership, I would even say around every elders table, leaders table,
sure,
every board.
And it seems to me that we, at least in the culture today, and maybe this has existed for a very long time, but it seems that we do everything in our power to avoid conflict. And yet I know that there can be some positive things that result from having, whether it's the predicament or the disagreement or to the contest, or we reach a point of fight or flight, but there has to be some way that things can be positive, even though there are negatives to that.
Yes. Two that come to my mind, in particular when I think of that. First is awareness. Mm. One of the greatest gifts of conflict is noting the fact that, one, we have a difference. Two, I begin to ponder my side of the issue, whatever the issue might be. Get the opportunity to examine myself in light of new knowledge. I get to examine myself in light of my own understanding. It's evaluatory.
Right.
I become aware of something of myself. I become aware of something of you. I become aware of a truth or an untruth in some cases. So conflict, one of its greatest strengths is it forces us to think and rethink the relationship.
Right.
What the relationship is based on, the goals that we share, the opportunities that we share. Any number of things can come into play, but conflict always causes us to stop. A predicament at that lowest level, perhaps,
Right.
makes me stop and think, wait, what does this mean? So that first challenge, which can be very positive, is this challenge to become aware of a truth or the circumstance. The second thing, particularly when it comes to church work, is a realization that conflict is not always bad. We do approach it from the standpoint too often to say any kind of conflict cannot exist in the body of Christ.
Right.
Oh, if it does, it is devilish, in most of our thinking. And the interesting thing is, in some ways, perhaps it is. Satan has a way of stirring the pot, as it were. But the reality is, God says, I'm in charge. And what comes out of conflict, because we become aware, because we have the opportunity for new truth and new understanding, what happens in the end is when all things work together for the good of the Lord, and we work back through the process of instead of distance and damage, working back through a healthier way of dealing with things, coming to a closer and closer kind of relationship as time goes on and as awareness grows. What happens is the body of Christ becomes stronger. We've become aware of our weaknesses. We can deal with those with new strength. We become aware of the reasons for our distance. We become aware of the nature of the damage that's done. And as we go through that process and we begin to work on those from a godly point of view, from a more spiritual point of view, what happens is the body of Christ grows stronger. It's iron sharpening iron, as it were. And so instead of allowing Satan to win this battle, God says, okay, we're going to take this, and if you'll let me, through my spirit and my influence, if you'll let me do that, I will bless you in this. And I think that's a part of the ultimate challenge of seeing conflict from that positive point of view.
Right.
Now, negatively is exactly the opposite. Negatively, what we have to do with is that distance and that damage. Negatively, distance is created, period. Any kind of conflict creates some sort of distance. How we respond makes all the difference in the world.
Sure.
And if we respond in negative ways, then the damage done will always be more acute, more specific, deeper, wider, more painful. Because as conflict grows, it becomes personal. As conflict grows, we become defensive. As conflict grows, we become aggressive and more selfish as time goes on.
Right.
And so ultimately, what was initially maybe not unhealthy, in fact, being aware is a pretty good thing. But when that awareness becomes selfish and becomes self-centered, then ultimately what happens is that distance and that damage does exactly what we see it doing now. We find ourselves, instead of working together, finding it very difficult to stand, even on the same side of the room in most issues.
Sure.
So, where a relationship should be defined by something we call love, relationships come down to very loose kinds of binders. The things that should hold us together become thinner and thinner and thinner. And in the realm of marriage, for instance, it's been described as a stairway. At the top of the stairway is unity, where a couple find themselves together. And with every conflict, we move a step down.
Yeah.
And then a step down, and then a step down. And about halfway through, everybody's hurting. Halfway down the stairway, we know something's got to change. But something has begun to happen. I suddenly realize, well, this is going to be tough. And I'm not sure going back up those stairs is exactly what I want to do.
Right.
Because you see, to get back through conflict, back up those stairs, what do I have to do? I have to deal with those conflicts. I have to come face to face with whatever it is that separated us. That couple has to go back through the process of working through those. So what happens after you get down the steps so far and you look up and there's so much to do, you become desperate and you run, or you become so desperate that you give up.
Right.
And then the question becomes, do I really love you anymore? Is it worth,
right,
in other words, fixing the problem?
Sure.
And so we withdraw. And we just stop. That happens not only in marriages, but in churches.
Oh, yes.
And just about every relationship.
Yeah. Well, I am very encouraged by what you're doing, number one, in working in this area. But I'm also excited about our conversation. So I'm looking forward to discussing this further with you. And we appreciate everybody tuning in today and listening to this particular SaltCast as we talk about and focus on some areas that involve conflict and conflict resolution. But thank you for joining us today. And please tune in again. We're going to continue this conversation with Brandi and look more deeply into areas of conflict and conflict resolution.